This is the one reason I believe that society is a mess right now. One, a lack of rite of passages. And two, a lack of the upholding of the standards of a right to pass into the next phase of your life. Let me explain my observations and finding. Yesterday, I was ready to give myself and my partner a haircut. While in the midst of getting a haircut, I like to watch a video just to make it more interesting for me and to allow the time to pass by. And so I gave my partner the option between two videos that I found on one of my longtime favorite YouTube channels called Jubilee. The reason why I love Jubilee is because they are asking the big and hard questions from a wide group of people, from a wide, diverse group of people. Sometimes it's opposing views. Sometimes it's a group view. A new segment that they have is called Surrounded, where it's 1 versus 20. But my favorite series with them is called Middle Ground. And between the two episodes, my partner wanted to watch the one that was millennial parents versus Gen Z parents. I'm guessing it's because they're a parent themselves. And so they were asking a lot of great questions on this episode. But there was one point in particular that stood out to me and inspired me to make this video because I started making connections in my mind based off of my observations and findings. Let's watch the clip. Ironically, this is something that I was talking to my partner the other day while we were waiting at the metro station. Given that they have a non binary child that is born in a male body and they just had an 11th birthday, we're having conversations about what is their rite of passage at 12 years old. And we were brainstorming and thinking about what that could look like, given that we didn't experience rites of passages at 12 years old, none that was overtly witnessed by our community. And then I thought, when you're born in a female body, you have a very obvious change in your body that says you're not a kid anymore. You are now moving into the next phase of your life, and that's a menstrual cycle. But what is it for those who are born in male bodies? And exactly what this guy says, that maybe something that's been missing specifically for men because they don't have as an obvious of change in their body like those born in female bodies. Maybe that's the reason why we're seeing so much content asking, are men okay? And so it's making me question, what are the rites of passages that not only men, but all of us not participating anymore? Because we're at this new point in society. You can see obviously in this video, it looks like and sounds like kids raising kids, like what we talked about in the last video. I mentioned that the idea that maybe we're actually kids all the way up until 40. But even then, there is no markers or rites of passage in between after the point of birth and up until that time. Again, those in female bodies experience a menstrual cycle. But even from my observation, I grew up in the Southwest, there was a quinceañera for those who are part of the Mexican culture. And then for the Filipino culture, there's a debut or a debut. And maybe for American culture, it's a sweet 16. But what about for our men? What about for our guys? What about those born in male bodies? And then I started thinking, okay, well, maybe it's graduation, or maybe it's the first time having intercourse, or maybe it's when you get married and have kids. But let's be honest. I would say that millennials were the start of the decline of getting married, having kids due to so many reasons. And I think that's even bigger question for Gen Z. From what I've heard through the grapevine, it seems like we're not even having as much sex anymore because we're too busy on our phones and on our devices, and maybe a plethora of other reasons too. And so I want to share with you a section in this book called The Power of Myth that was gifted to me by my best friend and my sibling, Alyssa, because they were reading it themselves. They know that I like to read. I like to read books that are about life, but also giving us some clues on how to best live our lives. That's probably why I got stuck in personal development and self-development for so long. I've gotten to a point where I was gravitating towards content that wanted to move beyond myself and wanted to have a greater understanding of each area of our lives. So I think this is why she ended up buying it for me and passing it along. But more importantly, because of the questions I was asking myself as to now being in a situation with a young person who just turned 11 years old, I'm having all these questions that didn't get to witness this person from birth and seeing how they're developing as a young person. And so my friend ended up sharing this part of my book that I would like to share with you all today. So first and foremost, what is a myth? In short, they're stories about the wisdom of life. Again, recognizing that stories are not fact. Stories are interpretations, perceptions, perspectives, and that we give them meaning. That's something that I want you to keep in mind when you think about the stories that we tell ourselves and the stories that we tell others. And I want you to think about it in terms of the stories you told yourself about the rites of passages you did or didn't experience, the stories that were shared about those rites of passages, the stories that we're sharing online right now, the story I'm sharing with you all, and recognizing the power that stories have, recognizing the power of myths. So again, I started this video saying, this is the reason why I believe our society is a mess right now. And so it says in this interview style book that was written in 1988 with the interviewer Bill Moyers and the interviewee Joseph Campbell. So Moyers asks, what happens when a society no longer embraces a powerful mythology? What we've got on our hands, if you want to find out what it means to have a society without any rituals, read the New York Times. And you'd find the news of the day, including destructive and violent acts by young people who don't know how to behave in a civilized society. Society has provided them no rituals by which they become members of the tribe, of the community. All children need to be twice born to learn to function rationally in the present world, leaving childhood behind. I think of that passage in the first book of Corinthians. When I was a child, I spake as a child. I understood as a child. I thought as a child. But when I became a man, I put away childish things. That's exactly it. That's the significance of the puberty rites. In primal societies, there are teeth knocked out, there are sacrifications, there are circumcisions, there are all kinds of things done. So you don't have to have your little baby body anymore. You're something else entirely. When I was a kid, we wore short trousers, knee pants. And then there was a great moment when you put on long pants. Boys now don't get that. I see even 5-year-olds walking around with long trousers. When are they going to know that they're now men and I must put aside childish things? Where do the kids growing up in the city, on 125th and Broadway, for example, where do these kids get their myths today? They make them up themselves. This is why we have graffiti all over the city. These kids have their own gangs and their own initiations and their own morality. And they're doing the best they can. But they're dangerous because their own laws are not those of the city. They have not been initiated into our society. Rollo May says there's so much violence in American society today because there are no more great myths to help young men and women relate to the world or to understand that world beyond what is seen. Yes, but another reason for the high level of violence here is that America has no ethos. Explain. Now, in a culture that has been homogenous for some time, there are a number of understood, unwritten rules by which people live. There is an ethos there. There is a mode, an understanding that we don't do it that way. A mythology. An unstated mythology, you might say. This is the way we use a fork and a knife. This is the way we deal with people, and so forth. It's not all written down in books, but in America, we have people from all kinds of backgrounds, all in a cluster together, and consequently, law has become very important in this country. Lawyers and law are what hold us together. There is no ethos. Do you see what I mean? Do you see what I mean? And I want to acknowledge that we're talking about in the West, exactly what is said in the book, that we are a culmination of so many different cultures, so many different kinds of people, so many different stories, so many different myths to some extent. And I want to account for that. There probably are lots of people who are going through rites of passages, but this is just my observation from listening to the stories I've heard, whether it's content online, from friends, from family, and even right here in my own household. And yeah, I'm a bit concerned. I never thought I'd actually be in this situation living with an 11-year-old kid, but I can't help but remember and be reflected and mirrored back to me all the experiences I had at 12 years old. I don't know about you, but 12 years old is when so many of my core memories were embedded into my body and into my mind and into my spirit because of the events that happened and the stories that I told myself because of those events and the lack of guidance and conversations and rites of passage to say, hey, the world is going to look and feel a little different after this point. Your body is going to change. You're going to experience feelings and thoughts and emotions that you probably haven't experienced before. Things are going to be different. And this rites of passage is to acknowledge that difference, to acknowledge that the way that the world interacted with you before is not the way that the world's going to interact with you afterwards. And so, can I be super duper honest and transparent? As I'm thinking about this right now, I'm thinking about the real and honest reason why I got married. Again, it wasn't something that I ever thought that I was going to do. It wasn't something that I desired. It wasn't something that was even expected of me. Again, I kind of been a kid that's been like floating in the wind and trying to figure it out for myself. And so I think for me, getting married was my own self initiation into a rites of passage. I wanted to know what it was like to be responsible for someone beyond myself. I wanted to know what it was like to step up. I want to know what it was like to take it to the next level. So I'm sitting here in my vulnerability and saying, like, yeah, under 40, still a kid. And I think that that might strike a lot of people's egos because we have this idea and understanding that just because our body ages means that we're older and more mature and know more. But I don't think that's the case. We have to remember that we're also not only part body, but we're part mind and spirit. As I was sharing in a previous video in relation to the book, The Pathwork of Self-Transformation, I talked about to be a full human, we have to develop all areas of our being. And that book particularly talks about our emotional health, our emotional understandings, our emotional well-beings. And so it makes sense to look out into the world and seeing people throw tantrums online and in person. And so I want to go back to this book and share with you an example of marriage and how myth and rituals and stories and rites of passages, I think, need to be re-implemented into the new society that we're building. So again, myths are stories of our search through the ages for truth, for meaning, for significance. We all need to tell our story and to understand our story. We all need to understand death and to cope with death. We all need help in our passages from birth to life and then to death. We need for life to signify, to touch the eternal, to understand the mysterious, to find out who we are. Myths are clues to the spiritual potentialities of human life. We're so engaged in doing things to achieve purposes of outer value that we forget that the inner value, the rapture that is associated with being alive, is what it's all about. How do you get that experience? Read myths. They teach you that you can turn inward and you begin to get the message of the symbols. Read other people's myths, not those of your own religion, because you tend to interpret your own religion in terms of facts. But if you read the other ones, you begin to get the message. Myth helps you to put your mind in touch with this experience of being alive. It tells you what the experience is. Marriage, for example. What is marriage? The myth tells you what it is. It's the reunion of the separated duad. Originally, you were one. You are now two in the world. But the recognition of the spiritual identity is what marriage is. It's different from a love affair. It has nothing to do with that. It's another mythological plane of experience. When people get married because they think it's a long-time love affair, they'll be divorced very soon because all love affairs end in disappointment. But marriage is recognition of a spiritual identity. If we live a proper life, if our minds are on the right qualities in regarding the person that we'd like to marry, we will find our proper counterpart. But if we are distracted by certain sensuous interests, we'll marry the wrong person. By marrying the right person, we reconstruct the image of the incarnate God, and that's what marriage is. The right person? How does one choose the right person? Your heart tells you. It ought to. Your inner being? That's the mystery. You recognize your other self. Well, I don't know, but there's a flash that comes and something in you knows that this is the one. Sorry, I'm reading that because for me, it came in a flash. If marriage is the reunion of the self, with the male or female grounding of ourselves, why is it that marriage is so precarious in our modern society? Because it's not regarded as marriage. I would say that if marriage isn't a first priority in your life, you're not married. The marriage means the two that are one. The two become one flesh. If the marriage lasts long enough, and if you are I gotta look up that word, dictionary. Accept something without protest. I gotta say this one. Acquiescence, acquiescing. Okay, if the marriage lasts long enough and you keep doing that thing constantly to it instead of to individual personal whim, you come to realize that this is true. The two really are one. One not only biologically, but spiritually. Primarily spiritually. The biological is the distraction which may lead you to the wrong identification. Then the necessary function of marriage, perpetuating ourselves in children, is not the primary one. No, that's really just the elementary aspect of marriage. There are two completely different stages of marriage. First is the youthful marriage, following the wonderful impulse that nature has given us in the interplay of sexes biologically in order to produce children. But there comes a time when the child graduates from the family and the couple is left. I've been amazed at the number of friends who are in their 40s or 50s go apart. They have had a perfectly decent life together with the child, but they interpreted their union in terms of their relationship through the child. They did not interpret it in terms of their own personal relationship to each other. Marriage is a relationship. When you make the sacrifice in marriage, you're sacrificing not to each other, but to unity in a relationship. The Chinese image of the Tao, with the dark and the light interacting, that's the relationship of yang and yin, male and female, which is what a marriage is. And that's what you have become when you have married. You're no longer this one alone. Your identity is in a relationship. Marriage is not a simple love affair, it's an ordeal. And the ordeal is the sacrifice of the ego to a relationship in which two have become one. So marriage is utterly incompatible with the idea of doing one's own thing. It's not simply one's own thing, you see. It is a sense, doing one's own thing. But the one isn't just you. It's the two together as one. And that's purely mythological image signifying the sacrifice of the visible entity for a transcendent good. I'm going to read that again. And that's a purely mythological image signifying the sacrifice of the visible entity for a transcendent good. This is something that becomes beautifully realized in the second stage of marriage, what I call the alchemical. Alchemy? Alchemical. Lord knows. We are always learning. Alchemical. Mekel? Alchemical? Of the that's what I call the alchemical stage of the two experiencing that they are one. They're still living as they were in the primary stage of marriage. They will go apart when their children leave. Daddy will fall in love with some little nubile girl and run off, and mother will be left with an empty house and heart and will have to work it out on her own, in her own way. That's because we don't understand the two levels of marriage. You don't make a commitment. We presume to. We make a commitment for better or for worse. That's the remnant of the ritual. And the ritual has lost its force. The ritual that once was conveyed in inner reality is now merely form. And that's true in the rituals of society and in the personal rituals of marriage and religion. How many people before marriage receive spiritual instruction as to what the marriage means? You can stand up in front of a judge and in 10 minutes, get married. The marriage ceremony in India lasts 3 days. That couple is glued. You're saying that marriage is not just a social arrangement, it's a spiritual exercise. It's primarily a spiritual exercise, and the society is supposed to help us have the realization. Man should not be in the service of society. Society should be in the service of man. When man is in service of the society, you have a monster state, and that's what is threatening the world at this minute. And then it goes into what I shared with you all earlier. What happens when a society no longer embraces a powerful mythology? What we've got on our hands? If you want to find out what it means to have a society without any rituals, read the New York Times. And it continues. So I wanted to share that example of a ritual and the myths of that ritual and rites of passage that we have remnants of in our society today. And given that I cannot participate fully and completely in the first marriage, which it says is the youthful marriage, following the wonderful impulse that nature has given us in the interplay of sexes biologically in order to produce children, since I'm in a queer relationship, can't do the youthful marriage, but I can speak for myself that I definitely feel like I'm experiencing the second kind of marriage. And it's definitely something else. I'm experiencing the mirroring. I'm experiencing the death of my ego. I'm experiencing the two become one. It doesn't help that both of us have shaved heads now, but I'm definitely having a spiritual experience in this ritual. in this rite of passage. And again, think about it. This used to happen to young people in their early 20s, maybe even 18. I know my Lola got married when she was 18. And then the next generation, our parents were around like the 25-ish, and then I would say even late 20s to early 30s. And for me, I got married at 35. So again, I'm just sharing my personal observations and experience as to why I feel like our society feels a little messy right now. But like I've shared in past videos, I believe that if you're alive today, especially if you're Gen X and younger, that we are a part of birthing a new kind of life. And I think something that we need to highly consider is implementing rites of passages again into our society, into the upbringing of humanity. And I think more importantly, it's upholding those standards before allowing this person to move on to the next phase of their life. I think it didn't help that we started giving participation awards, that we started doing graduation in kindergarten, started doing graduation in middle school, and then like what we did in high school. Young people aren't even thinking about going to college anymore. So just like look, observe, and see that like the erasure of any rites of passages are not happening anymore. And what is that going to look like for the future of humanity? We're truly all just going to be kids raising kids, which we've been doing for 2 generations now, 3 generations now. I don't think that's been working for us. And I don't think having a certain amount of followers is a rite of passage either. And so I want to see this as an opportunity. I want us to change our perspective from what the world is today, what society is today. Again, we could put our head in the sand and look down and pretend like it's not happening and just hope that it passes by over our shoulders. And we get to look up and the sky is blue, the sun is shining, and there so happens to be a rainbow in the background. But by the time that we look up, our whole life has passed us, and we haven't participated or contributed in the world that's going to come. I don't think a strategy is for us to be passive, but to be proactive. And again, that's why I'm here. For me, someone who is proactive has a level of leadership within them, that they're proactive in their own life, that they're leading in their own life. It's not easy. It's not easy to look up and look at yourself in the mirror and say, what can I be doing differently? How can I create my own rites of passage? How can I create my own rituals? How can I create my own curriculums? If the world and society isn't going to do it for me, how can I create that for myself? How can I create that with others? How can I create that with friends and with family? We're at a point in history where we get to redefine new mythologies, new stories, create new clues for future generations. We're truly at ground zero together. But are you going to allow it to pass you by? Are you going to let this opportunity to pass you by? Or are you going to do something about it? I'm not out here to say, go change the world. The world is changing regardless. But what I'm learning about myself in my marriage is that if I change myself first, if I approach things differently, if I tell a different story, if I practice a different ritual, I instantly receive feedback to see if it works or doesn't work, whether from my partner or their kid. So again, it's not about going out and changing the world, because the world is going to change anyways. It's asking, how can I make a change within myself? How can I make a change within my living situation? How can I make a change with my neighbors? How can I make a change within my neighborhood? How can I make a change within my local community? And I think if we all questioned and defined how we can do that on a day-to-day level, I believe that there would be a compounding effect in which will change the world. And my suggestion, personally, within your family, within your friends, within your community, how can we create new rituals and rites of passages? How can we be a witness to each other when we've crossed the line from one phase to the other? How can we honor the person that we were and the person that we're becoming? How can we be imaginative and create new stories and new rituals and new myths for the next generation and for future generations to practice and follow? So my question for all of you, did you experience a rites of passage as a young person or any point in your life? Is there rites of passage that you had to create for yourself? Or is there one that you're thinking about creating? Overall, I'd like to continue our conversation and what you think about my idea of implementing rites of passages into the new society that we're building, creating, and contributing to. And if you've already created one that you've already implemented, I'd love to hear more about it in the comments below so that we all can be inspired by each other's ideas and practices and potentially implement them into our own lives. All right, y'all. I hope this video helps you on your journey. I hope that you consider implementing rites of passages into your life. And I also hope you consider the perspective that we're possibly in a global rites of passage right now, and that we have a very unique opportunity, that we get to recreate and redefine what it means to be human in this lifetime. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see y'all in the next video.